What would happen if a chef once shunned by an entire city suddenly reappeared in the very kitchen that destroyed his reputation, and this time he refuses to stay silent? The kitchen was dead silent. No sound of knives or sizzling pans, only the cold hum of the air conditioning blending with the pale white light from overhead. Every gaze was fixed on one man, Caleb Miles. His chef's coat was unbuttoned, his hands still trembling, and a cracked egg dripped slowly to the floor, its thick, raw white forming a trail that seemed to scream something had gone terribly wrong. No one spoke until a voice from behind rang out low, sharp, like a blade sliding across raw skin. "You're done, golden boy." It was the voice of head chef Trent Dorian, whose eyes never smiled, only cut like steel. Caleb didn't respond. He simply stared at the carton of eggs beside him, where the stench of spoiled food still clung in the air. His silence felt like another blade slashing through an already taut space. At a nearby table, a customer quietly pushed their plate away, their eyes now watching the unfolding scene instead of their breakfast. The atmosphere simmered, no one daring to touch it, like water on the verge of boiling over. And then, time slid backward 3 days earlier. A black SUV idled across the street, morning light glinting off its chrome trim. Inside, Liam Norwood, owner of the Norwood Table restaurant chain, once featured on the covers of business magazines for his polished smile and five-star brand, gripped the steering wheel tightly. From the outside, Maple Lane Grill still looked like a thriving establishment. Crisp signage, clean glass doors, employees moving in and out. But Liam knew what was rotting beneath the surface. Online reviews were plummeting, refund requests were rising, and the health inspector had issued a red warning. In just the past 48 hours, 3 formal complaints had been filed with Norwood Holdings Quality Board. That morning, a final notice had landed in his inbox. One more violation and the restaurant would be delisted. 12 years of building, and one reckless person could tear it all down. Liam exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. A restaurant might fail from bad food, but it rots from bad people. He looked into the mirror, adjusted his fake beard, and pulled a baseball cap low over his brow. Today, he wasn't walking in as the owner. He was Logan Marsh, a freelance delivery driver. The worn uniform laid across the passenger seat had a name patch stitched flat, Logan M. His hand rested on the door handle as he crossed into a space that used to be his, but now he'd return as a stranger. The bell above the door chimed with a tired, dragging sound as he stepped inside. The first thing that hit him wasn't a greeting, but the smell. The familiar mix of coffee and charred meat was undercut by something else sour, fishy, with a faint metallic edge. No one looked up. Morning rush had the kitchen spinning like a machine staff darting around, plates clanging, order calls blending together. From the back, a tall man with grease-streaked sleeves emerged. "Delivery? You're late," he grunted, not bothering to ask his name. "Coffee's in the corner, don't touch anything unless told." Liam nodded, keeping his voice low. "Got it." He poured a cup of coffee for a staff member, thin, lukewarm brown liquid, and quietly observed. From that corner he saw the entire pass line, fridge doors swinging open and shut, and workers moving like they were trying to outrun the clock. But something was off. The rhythm wasn't urgency, it was survival. No one smiled. No one made eye contact. Then his eyes landed on one person, a stillness amidst the chaos. The only one not rushing, but flowing, as if the knife and produce understood each other. It was the first time Liam saw Caleb Miles, and he had no idea that this man would soon be the reason a 3-year cover-up was about to shatter. Liam leaned lightly against the wall near the coffee machine, the heat from the paper cup in his hand doing nothing to ease the cold that ran down his spine. From where he stood, he had a full view of the kitchen, a place that was once the pride of the Norwood Table brand, now resembling more of a production facility than a culinary space. The pass line was cluttered with half-finished plates, ovens beeped relentlessly, and the staff moved along paths that felt automatic, as if on autopilot. No one spoke. Only commands were heard. Everything operated like clockwork, but this was not the rhythm of professional pride. It was the ticking of exhaustion. The metallic scent mingled with raw meat clung to the air. A waitress discreetly wiped wilted greens from a plate and still placed it on a tray to be served. No one said a word. No one corrected her. Liam took a sip of his coffee, a bitter black liquid, harsher than any quality report he had ever read. Amid it all, the only person who made Liam do a double take was Caleb, stationed quietly in the far corner of the kitchen, not speaking. Yet every slice, every motion of his hands, carried an unusual calm. While most staff moved as if driven by looming deadlines, Caleb worked to a different beat, one deliberate, measured, and skilled. "Who is he?" Liam muttered, eyes fixed on the man slicing onions into perfect julienne strands as if straight from a culinary textbook. A woman in her 40s wearing a manager's uniform walked by. Liam gently stopped her with his shoulder. "That guy, who is he?" he asked, doing his best to keep the tone casual, like a delivery driver making idle conversation. She paused, glanced quickly at Caleb, then lowered her voice. "Caleb Miles. Started less than 2 weeks ago. Too good, which means he doesn't fit in here." She moved on, leaving behind a few parting words that sounded more like a looming question. "Trent hates him." Trent Dorian, the head chef, stepped out of the walk-in freezer just then, his eyes sharp like a worn blade. Liam recognized that walk, the kind of man who didn't inspect but commanded, didn't manage but threatened. Trent brushed past Caleb, glanced at the veggie plate, and sneered. "You think this is a 5-star restaurant?" Caleb didn't respond. He simply wiped his knife and moved on to the next bunch of parsley. His eyes were vacant, but his hands weren't. And Liam knew this wasn't silence born of submission, but the silence of someone who had once been drowned and was waiting for the right moment to rise. Lunch hour passed, but the kitchen stayed wound tight like a drawn bow. Liam kept up his act, hauling boxes, restocking supplies, even washing trays. From behind, he noticed Caleb constantly adjusting prepped ingredients, removing wilted greens, discarding meat that smelled off. No one thanked him. No one even noticed. But Liam saw everything. Caleb wasn't just saving dishes, he was trying to save the entire kitchen with quiet, deliberate movements. And that silence unsettled Liam more than anything. No one works that hard to do things right unless they have a reason to prove they can't afford to get it wrong again. By late afternoon, Liam stepped out back for air and heard Caleb's voice near the dumpsters. "I know I'm behind on rent again, Mom, but here, no one knows who I am. No one calls me that name." His voice cracked at the end. "I just want to cook, that's all." Liam held his breath in the shadowed alley. The breeze carried the stench of old food and cigarette smoke, but what lingered most was that final sentence. "No one calls me that name." Who had Caleb been before? And what nightmare was quietly resurfacing beneath this kitchen, where everything looked clean on paper, but was rotting from within? The next morning, Liam arrived at the restaurant before the first shift. He sat in his car, pretending to check delivery orders, but in truth, he was observing. Beneath his worn jacket and low-pulled cap, he watched the weary stream of workers file in through the side entrance, moving along a path so habitual it no longer required memory. And yet, among that flow, only one person had already arrived: Caleb. No one called him, no one reminded him, no one needed to witness it. He entered the kitchen as if it were a temple in need of purification. He opened every tray of produce, sniffed, touched, tasted. Each movement was carried out with ritual-like precision, not out of belief, but survival. Caleb carefully cracked each egg, tapping twice on the edge of the counter and holding it up to the light. One made him freeze. No clear smell, but his reaction suggested he sensed something far beyond the safety threshold. He set that egg aside and continued. Liam quietly entered through the delivery door, watching from behind the storeroom wall. It wasn't Caleb's skill that surprised him. It was the fear beneath the meticulousness. No one checks eggs like that out of mere responsibility. No one smells greens 3 times just to avoid a warning. This wasn't perfectionism, it was the behavior of someone once blamed for a mistake they didn't make and who would not allow it to happen again. Trent entered the kitchen 5 minutes late, as usual, hands empty, inspecting nothing, just barking orders and tossing his apron onto a shelf. Caleb immediately shrank back, eyes fixed on the cutting board, hands never stopping, but his breath quickened. Each time Trent passed behind him, Caleb's shoulders flinched. Once, when a metal pan slammed down, Caleb instinctively covered his head, then quickly pretended to drop a spoon. Liam saw it clearly. This wasn't the first time. This kitchen didn't just lack sanitation, it lacked safety. During the morning rush, Caleb clung to the prep station like the last anchor in a storm. Plates were returned one after another, burnt toast, undercooked bacon, cold potatoes. Tina, the floor manager, sighed. Table 4s returned their meal for the third time. Trent merely smirked. Tell them to eat somewhere else. Caleb said nothing. He sliced tomatoes into uniform rounds as if drawn with a compass, his hands precise though his eyes quietly drifted toward the walk-in cooler. Liam circled through the dry goods room, watching everything, and then he saw it. When Trent opened the refrigerator, artificial cold spilled out, but so did a sour stench carried by the air. Caleb froze, sniffed, then tossed all the sliced meat he'd been working on. A little later, he picked up a bag of greens from the cooler. The seal wasn't closed. The outer label said yesterday, but a secondary tag inside read a date from last week. The leaves were damp, limp, spotted black. Caleb quietly carried the bag toward the back. No one noticed until Trent exited the storage room and crossed paths with him. What are you doing with those greens? Caleb held up the bag. They're spoiled, shouldn't be used. Trent snatched it from him, tossed it in a different bin. I manage the inventory. You cook what hits the line. Caleb didn't resist. But Liam, standing behind the spice rack, saw it all. That afternoon, Liam searched through Norwood Holdings' internal system. With admin access, he pulled old records from restaurants in the company's portfolio, tracing back to the incident at Meridian 5 years ago, where a young chef had been publicly disgraced over a serious food poisoning case. When he typed in Caleb Miles and the system returned, former executive chef Meridian, James Beard nominee, terminated after outbreak. Liam's hand froze. That was his old name. And beneath the final note, one detail made Liam's breath catch a temporary staff member listed on the schedule that day. T. Dorian Line Cook, Coastal Kitchen, temporary transfer 1 week. The same man, the same kitchen, the same pattern repeating itself, but this time Liam knew the man behind it wasn't just a skilled manipulator, he was a ghost who stayed clean by burying others. The next morning, Liam walked into Maple Lane Grill without needing to remind himself that today he wasn't walking in as the owner. Every one of his senses was on alert. That same familiar smell, the smell of something dead being forced to keep existing, still lingered in the air, only more subtle now, masked deliberately by the scent of grease and burnt coffee. But he knew when rot is blended into the familiar, that's when it becomes most dangerous because no one notices anymore. Once again, Caleb was the first to arrive. He inspected the fridge with the quiet caution of someone who had survived a disaster, opening each container, sniffing each bag, tapping lightly on every surface as if checking for landmines. And as always, no one noticed except Liam. From behind the storeroom door, he saw Caleb holding a tray of ground beef. The label read, "Delivered yesterday." But its color and smell told a different story. Caleb placed it in the discard tray. 10 minutes later, when Liam returned, the tray was empty. The meat had vanished. At the same moment, Trent barked from the back kitchen, "Don't toss food like that, chef boy. Nobody here's rich enough to waste." Caleb didn't answer, just nodded silently, but Liam couldn't stay quiet anymore. That night, in his home office, Liam reopened the entire Meridian file from years ago. He began piecing together what he knew names of chefs fired for food safety violations, the timeline of Trent's presence, and Caleb's final statement back then, "I never touched that shrimp batch. I wasn't even in the kitchen when it arrived." Then another name surfaced in the company records, Nina Vong, line cook, previously at Maple Lane, terminated for using expired ingredients. Liam found her old phone number on a job application and called. There was silence on the other end, then a soft voice. "I signed an NDA. Liam quickly said, "I'm not calling as a business owner. I'm calling as someone who knows you weren't wrong. A long pause, then a near whisper. You saw it too, didn't you? It was him. Liam nodded, even though she couldn't see. I need to know what happened that day. Nina's story matched the surveillance footage. Cream she checked the night before had magically expired by morning, meat trays were relocated, logs tampered with. It all pointed to one conclusion: the violations weren't accidents, they were orchestrated by the same person, using the same formula, and the only one who stood up was the first to be sacrificed. The next morning, Liam stood outside the restaurant holding a folder packed with evidence: falsified delivery logs, duplicated orders, phantom invoices, fake supplier names. But it still wasn't enough. The proof had to be undeniable. So that night, he gave the order to execute the plan, placing spoiled ingredients in all the usual hiding spots Trent favored: behind the freezer, inside the backup supply bins, even under the auxiliary sink. Everything was fitted with hidden cameras. No one knew, except Caleb, who was finally ready. Not to escape, but to prove something. Not just to Liam, but to himself. When Trent secretly grabbed a tray of rotten eggs from the dark corner behind the freezer, placed it on Caleb's station just as he stepped out for fresh herbs, and adjusted the stock logs, he didn't know his every move had been captured from 3 different angles. Every motion, every trace fell perfectly into the trap he once set for others. Only this time, every link in the chain had reverse direction. At exactly 7:42 a.m., the sound of the front door chime rang out. Liam stepped into Maple Lane Grill, no longer wearing the driver's cap or bulky jacket. But he wasn't yet the CEO either. Today, he was the final observer before the storm broke. Everything was in place. The 3 hidden cameras were working properly, recording had started at dawn, and the test ingredients, rotten eggs, spoiled meat, curdled milk, had been positioned in the very spots Trent often used to manipulate evidence. The only question that remained was whether Trent would take the bait. Caleb maintained his usual rhythm, revealing nothing unusual. He carefully checked the prep station, inspecting labels, temperatures, and every ingredient tray. His eyes paused briefly at the tray of eggs that had just been replaced, narrowing slightly, but he didn't react. He took a quiet breath and continued working as if nothing had happened. Liam stood behind the cafe counter, observing with his eyes and listening with the instincts of a man who had once lost an entire company for trusting the wrong person. Trent moved around the kitchen as though everything remained under his control, occasionally bumping shoulders with Caleb or throwing out snide remarks like, "James Beard should give you the Budget Wrecker Award." Then the breakfast rush came crashing in like a tide, tickets printed nonstop. "Breakfast special, table 12, a server shouted. Caleb stepped up to the egg station. He picked up the first egg, holding it up to the light. The yolk looked dark, the whites murky with a yellow tinge. His eyes darkened. Then he cracked the shell. The stench hit instantly, sour, sharp, pungent like ammonia. He didn't shout or cause a scene. He simply said, calmly but firmly, "These eggs are spoiled. They can't be used." The kitchen froze. Trent spun around, face darkened. "What did you just say?" Caleb didn't back down. "These eggs are rotten, contaminated. Cooking them will cause food poisoning." A split second later, Trent was in front of him, voice lowered to a venomous hiss. "You think you're smarter than this kitchen? Bacteria die when cooked. That's science, paper chef." Liam held his breath. This was the moment everything would turn. But Caleb stood firm, hands clenched, eyes locked on the cracked shell. "Not all bacteria die at that temperature. Not with this kind. I won't make that mistake again." Trent snarled, slamming his hand down on the egg tray, shattering more shells. "You don't get to decide. I run this kitchen." Caleb looked up, his voice steeled. "I was blamed for poisoning 37 people. Just because I stayed silent, I'm not staying silent again." A moment of dead silence. None of the cooks moved. Tina glanced toward the dining area and saw a few guests had already stood up, filming. Caleb stepped back from the line, his voice cutting through the air like steel. "Expired milk is still used for coffee. Beef left out for 3 hours. Moldy cheese scraped and served. Everyone here knows, but no one speaks. Trent roared, "You're haunted by your past. No one here believes you." But just then, Liam stepped out from behind the counter, walked straight to the kitchen, and placed a small bowl on the prep table. Inside was the egg Caleb had just discarded. He cracked one more egg into the bowl. The stench filled the kitchen instantly. Then, in a low, firm voice, he said, "This isn't just a bad egg. It's a warning, and I believe the man who dared to speak up." Every eye turned to Liam. Slowly, he removed the baseball cap, then peeled off the fake beard he had worn all week. Tina dropped her tray, eyes wide with shock. Trent stumbled back half a step, face drained of color. And Caleb, his eyes, for the first time, looked as if he truly saw an ally in this long, silent kitchen. No one in the kitchen moved as Liam Reed stepped onto the cook line, revealing his true identity. The air thickened like old fryer smoke, so heavy that the sound of a spoon falling echoed like an alarm bell. Trent forced a smile, but his eyes flickered with panic like a cornered animal. "What are you doing here? I thought you—" "No need to think anything anymore, Trent." Liam cut him off, his voice cold and firm. "I've seen enough. But more importantly, everyone else here deserves to see it too." He pulled out his phone and connected it to the screen above the pass normally used to display order tickets. Within seconds, the image changed. No more orders, just video. 3 hidden camera angles appeared simultaneously. Trent was clearly visible on screen, sneaking into the walk-in freezer early that morning, pulling out a carton of eggs, placing them at Caleb's station, and adjusting the inspection log like it was a well-rehearsed habit. A sharp breath came from one of the line cooks. Someone near the screen stepped back like they'd just realized the ground beneath them had given way. Tina stammered, her eyes glued to the screen. "He actually did that." Liam didn't say a word. He let the footage speak, Trent relabeling meat trays, swapping stickers, stacking products in violation of temperature guidelines. The footage was clear, the angles undeniable. Trent stumbled back a step, his voice straining with desperation. "That's fake. Someone edited the footage. You people don't understand this industry. Everyone cuts corners to survive." Liam placed a thick folder onto the stainless steel counter, papers spilling out duplicate invoices, phantom orders. Ingredients billed, but never delivered. "No one cuts corners by destroying someone else's career," he said, "and you didn't do it just once." Caleb stood still, fists clenched at his sides, eyes no longer shaken but razor-focused. Liam continued, "Meridian, 5 years ago, a shipment of seafood caused a mass food poisoning outbreak. And you, yes, you were the temp transferred in that week. No one noticed, no one investigated, but I pulled every record. Your name is right there. And now you're repeating the exact same playbook here." Trent opened his mouth, but before he could speak, 2 knocks sounded at the back door. Liam turned and opened it. 2 uniformed police officers stepped in. One asked, "Trent Dorian?" Trent froze, eyes darting around. No one in the kitchen looked at him. Everyone avoided his gaze. Those who once feared now had the truth standing with them. And truth doesn't need to shout it, only needs to arrive at the right moment. Trent didn't resist. His hands were cuffed behind his back. As he passed by Caleb, his eyes threw a black, hateful glare. But Caleb didn't flinch. He didn't even look back. Because at last, the fear that had haunted him now had a face, and it was finally leaving this kitchen for good. When the back door shut behind Trent, no one said a word. Only the ceiling vent hummed, and a collective breath escaped like pressure finally released. Caleb quietly washed his hands under the faucet, each finger moving under the water as if shedding years of ash and ruin. Liam stood beside him and asked softly, "You okay?" Caleb looked him in the eye and nodded. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm standing in a kitchen without having to bow my head." The morning after Trent was taken away, Maple Lane Grill was no longer a restaurant of side glances, weary sighs behind backs, and hesitant footsteps in the kitchen hallways. It was quiet, but no longer the kind of silence born of fear. Instead, it was the stillness that follows after something toxic has been removed, like a tumor cut out, and the body learning how to breathe again. Caleb stood at his prep station, hands resting on the cold metal surface, eyes closed for a second, as if checking whether this was all real. No yelling, no eyes watching for a mistake, no traps. For the first time in years, he didn't have to double-check everything just to be sure no one had set him up. Liam wasn't resting either. He sat in the upstairs office, surveillance system running at full view. Clips from every day Trent had stepped foot in the restaurant were logged, labeled, and sent to Rorick Holdings' legal department. A comprehensive case file was taking shape, listing every unjustified termination, flagged shipments, cross-referenced timestamps from delivery logs and security footage. Each detail was a puzzle piece, and now the full picture of Trent's manipulations was complete. But Liam knew he wasn't the only one who needed to see that picture. That afternoon, he called a meeting with the entire staff in the break room. No microphones, no slideshows, no chairs lined in rows, just a circle, with him standing in the center holding a folder of documents. Tina, who had remained silent in every previous meeting, was the first to speak. We knew something was off, but none of us could be sure. Liam nodded, his voice calm. I wasn't sure either. That's why I had to see it for myself. And Caleb's courage gave me that chance. He passed around printed records, evidence of altered labels, footage of Trent's hidden actions. One by one, the employees looked at each word, each image. No one asked questions, because they didn't need to. A young cook in the corner lifted his head, eyes misted. So, everything Caleb said, it was true. Caleb said nothing. His hands tightened together slightly, as if steadying his breath. But in his eyes, the weight was lifting not just for himself, but for every person who had been silenced like him. Liam laid one last paper on the table, a photo of Caleb's old award from Meridian, the one the media buried after the scandal. He spoke slowly. The truth can't change the past, but it can save the future. Then he turned to Caleb. You weren't destroyed by a mistake. You were destroyed by silence. And today, that silence is over. Tina was the first to clap, then another. Soon the entire room was on its feet. Not because the meeting was over, but because something new had just begun. Trust, once twisted and broken, had returned. Not through promises, but through proof. Not through slogans, but through transparency. As everyone returned to the kitchen, Liam called Caleb aside. He pulled from his bag a crisp new chef's coat, the Maple Lane logo stitched in silver thread over the left chest. Below it, a sharp line of text read, Executive Chef Caleb Ward. Caleb paused for a moment, then took it. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the emotion rising in his throat. I never thought I'd wear something like this again, he said quietly. Liam smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. Then it's time to prove you deserve it more than anyone ever has. 2 weeks after Trent Dorian was removed from Maple Lane Grill, the kitchen that once seemed beyond saving had transformed into something entirely different. Gone were the screams that cracked like whips on metal. Gone were the averted gazes, the heavy footsteps, and the meals served with doubt. Everything was being rebuilt, not with bricks, but with trust. Caleb entered the kitchen at 5:40 a.m., earlier than anyone else, as he always did. But now, it wasn't about avoidance. It was about ownership. The overhead lights reflected off newly installed stainless steel counters. Real-time temperature sensors were mounted at each station. Sanitation and inventory checklists were posted at the prep area, and no one ignored them anymore. Caleb inspected each tray of meat, recorded temperatures, checked the fridge's cooling level not out of fear of sabotage, but because these were the standards he chose to uphold. Liam walked in not long after, clipboard in hand. But today, there were no red stamps, no warnings, no notes of reprimand. Only a list of proposals from the internal team, longer breaks between shifts, rehiring employees previously terminated without clear justification, and adjusting the training budget for food safety skills. I've signed it, Liam said, placing the file on the table. but I want your approval before we send it down. This is your kitchen now." Caleb looked up, no longer the timid chef from the past. His eyes were clear, composed, and held something he had never allowed himself before: agency. "I want to add one item," he said. "Every week, 15 minutes at the start of the morning shift. Not for cooking lessons, just to talk." Liam tilted his head. "Talk about what?" Caleb gave a slight smile. "About how we lose our way, and how not to go back there again." The proposal was approved the very next day. In the small break room at the back, Caleb stood before a whiteboard. Around him were chefs, servers, dishwashers. No one was left out. He wrote one sentence on the board: "Safety is not a rule, it's a promise." The room fell silent, but not from indifference. People took notes, exchanged glances, looked at him. No one said a word, but everyone understood. After everything they'd been through, this place was no longer just a restaurant, it was the beginning of something bigger. Back in the kitchen, Tina had been promoted to sous chef. Naha, the young woman once fired over a false accusation, had been personally invited back by Caleb. At the sauté station, she cooked with speed, precision, and such focused energy that even the newcomers stood in awe. One day, when a young cook struggled with his knife, Caleb approached. "Let me," he said. But instead of taking over, he guided the cook's hand, showing how to tilt the wrist, how to feel the knife's weight. "Let the blade do the work. Your job is to keep your hands from rushing." The young cook nodded, eyes lighting up. Across the counter, Liam leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, silently watching. In a kitchen once thought beyond repair, there were now the sounds of knives on cutting boards, water running, laughter mingling with the whir of exhaust fans, no yelling, no silence born of fear. He watched Caleb instruct, saw the team moving in sync, and thought to himself, this isn't just a recovered kitchen, this is a reborn brigade. The old award photo from Meridian, once buried in shame, now sat proudly next to Maple Lane's perfect food safety certification, as if to affirm that a person's honor isn't defined by where they fell, but by where they stood up to defend what's right. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting a soft golden hue on the floor, like the color of a perfectly set egg yolk. Caleb Ward stood by the prep station, holding a small paring knife, watching a young cook named Mason practicing how to chop onions. Mason, just 18, had clumsy hands and a nervous breath, as if every slice was a gamble. "Wait," Caleb gently interrupted. "Don't use force, use feel." He took the knife, demonstrating each movement. "This angle, this rhythm, and let the blade do the hard part. You're just here to guide it." Mason tried again. It still wasn't perfect, but it was better. Caleb gave a small nod, his eyes betraying the quiet joy of a teacher when a student begins to feel the tool. Across the kitchen, Na was checking the temperature of the demi-glace pot. Tina was showing a new hire how to sort produce by delivery date. There were no shouts. No one bowed their head in fear. Every movement in the kitchen flowed like a symphony without a conductor, because everyone had learned how to truly listen to one another. On the break room's whiteboard, the words, "Safety is a promise," still remained. And beneath it, a new line had been added that morning, written by Caleb himself. "Leadership is not about stepping forward. It's about standing still when others need it." Liam entered the kitchen silently. He paused at the doorway, taking in the full view. Gleaming stoves, complete inventory logs, staff switching shifts and helping each other without being told. Then his gaze turned to Caleb, who was now leaning over to adjust Mason's grip. There was no scolding, just a soft shoulder tap and a smile. Liam knew that moment mattered more than any award. He walked up and placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "I have a proposal," he said. "Let's restart the apprentice chef training program, but no outside consultants." Caleb looked at him, tilting his head. "Then who's going to train them?" Liam smiled. "You, and others like you, people who don't just know how to cook, but know how to keep their hearts clean." At the end of the evening shift, when the crowd had thinned, Caleb and Mason sat at the side table. The young boy opened his notebook, scribbling down every little tip Caleb had shared throughout the day. The handwriting was slanted and hurried, but full of respect. Caleb picked up a pen and added a line in the margin. No one becomes a chef just by knowing how to season. A true cook is someone willing to take responsibility for every bite they serve. Mason read the words in silence, then carefully copied them in his own hand, letter by letter, like a quiet vow. Caleb smiled softly and closed the notebook. "You've got it now." Outside in the dining area, a group of regulars stood and approached the counter. A middle-aged man looked through the kitchen window and said, "I used to avoid this place after my wife got food poisoning here last year. Today, she finished her entire plate and even ordered dessert." Caleb heard him clearly and felt the weight of forgiveness, not from the media, but from those who had truly lost trust. Liam stepped beside him and whispered, "Real change doesn't start when you fire the wrong person. It starts when someone chooses to stand still in the right place." Caleb didn't respond. He simply tightened the strap of his apron. The evening light reflected off the embroidery on his chest, executive chef. But today, that title was no longer a burden to carry. It was proof, a quiet answer to years of being misunderstood. 6 months after the incident, Maple Lane Grill was no longer the restaurant whispered about as the town's dead kitchen. On the large glass door now hung a small wooden sign carved with the words, "We don't just cook, we serve responsibility." Inside, the wooden tables had been replaced. Warm lighting poured into every corner, and the soft scent of herbs blended with a hint of grilled meat lingered in the air like a silent embrace of memory and of what's yet to come. In the kitchen, Caleb Ward moved seamlessly between stations, no longer the man shadowed by his past, but the soul of the kitchen. His name, Executive Chef Caleb Ward, was embroidered in dark gray thread on a white coat, not flashy, because he no longer needed to prove anything. He stood beside Na, who had just plated the brisket slow-braised with bay leaves and cider reduction. When the guest at table 5 took the first bite and closed their eyes to savor every layer of flavor, a smile spread from the kitchen, not loud but quietly proud. Tina coordinated smoothly between the dining room and kitchen, hair tied up high, a small earpiece resting on her collar, rarely needing to use the mic because everything ran smoothly now. No one had to shout to be heard. Mason had become a full-fledged line cook, his grip on the knife firm, his notebook turned into a handbook passed down to new hires. On the first page, a line handwritten in black ink read, "Never cut corners, only vegetables." On the far wall near the kitchen door hung the latest food safety certificate perfect score. No violations framed in minimalist dark wood. But the real highlight wasn't in numbers or certifications. Every dish leaving the kitchen now carried something immeasurable by reports or reviews. Trust. And customers sensed it from the eyes of the servers, from the way the chefs looked through the pass window until the last second, from the calm in the space where no one worked in fear of being stabbed in the back anymore. Liam arrived on a late weekend afternoon. He entered with no name badge, no authority in hand. He wasn't there to inspect, but to sit at the corner table, the one he used to avoid. Caleb came over, not with a menu, but with 2 cups of coffee. "I remember the first time I met you," Liam said. "You were shaking so badly you dropped your knife 3 times in 10 minutes. Caleb chuckled. "Now the only thing I make drop are tears with dessert." They didn't talk about Trent. They didn't mention the lawsuit still pending. No one brought up the Meridian scandal. There was no need. Those things no longer defined the present. Caleb looked around the staff, moved like people who knew exactly where they stood, and more importantly, why they were there. A young cook on shift passed by, notebook in hand, hesitantly asking, "Chef Caleb, what did you note yesterday at the prep station? I didn't understand the last line." Caleb nodded, standing up. "Come, I'll show you." He didn't explain with theory. He demonstrated how to slice carrots, how to taste the demi-glace while keeping an eye on the kitchen. Learning to cook isn't the hard part. The hard part is becoming a chef others can trust. Evening approached. The kitchen was clean. Shift changes moved at an easy rhythm. Caleb stood in the center of the kitchen, eyes on the old whiteboard. Now it wasn't just a slogan. It had become a space where staff wrote down weekly lessons. At the bottom was the latest line, written by Mason himself. Integrity tastes better. Caleb read it, then looked at Liam. Do you think people will write about us again? Liam took a sip of coffee and smiled. Let them. But we didn't do this for headlines. He pointed to the shift schedule where photos of returning staff and new talents were posted, and said softly, we do this because no one else will if we don't step up first. And so, in a kitchen once steeped in rot and injustice, now lingered only the scent of herbs, melting butter, and something warmer than any flame hope. Caleb's story isn't just a journey to reclaim his reputation. It's proof that integrity, even when buried for years, can rise again, as long as someone dares to step into the light. A clean kitchen isn't made by protocol alone, but by people who choose to put conscience before performance. If you believe that trust can be rebuilt, one careful step at a time, then like and subscribe to join us in these stories of quiet justice. And don't forget to leave a comment with 3 words: stand for dignity, because sometimes what keeps a kitchen standing isn't fire, but character.